morning, the Syrian government launched a brutal attack on a rebel-controlled area of Idlib with what witnesses say was poison gas. Rescue workers raced to reach the bodies of dozens of victims, including women and small children.
كنت نايم ضربت الطيارة قمت طلعنا أنا والبابا فتت لجوا صار راسي يوجعني نمت ونيك مدري جابني لهون.
Hospitals were overwhelmed with patients choking, vomiting, and foaming at the mouth.
بالنسبة للكيماوي طبعا هي أول مرة نتعرض لمنطقتنا للهجوم الكيماوي بهالكمية هاي وبهالعدد هذا.
Patients have got clear signs of organophosphate attack.
Hours after the first attack, rockets also hit at least one clinic nearby where victims were being treated. The Syrian government denies even having chemical weapons, but this isn't the first time it's been implicated in the chemical attack. Investigations by the UN and the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons have found that forces on both sides of the 6-year conflict have used chlorine, sulfur mustard gas, and sarin gas. The deadliest attack killed hundreds of people near Damascus in August 2013. The White House blamed the Assad regime for today's attack, but it also blamed former President Obama, saying it was, quote, a consequence of the last administration's weakness and irresolution. The Obama administration spent years demanding President Assad leave office, but last week, Trump's UN ambassador Nikki Haley said that that's no longer a priority. When the federal government thinks that a police department is acting improperly, it puts forward what's called a consent decree, essentially an agreement that allows the Justice Department to monitor local cops. The Obama administration entered into 14 consent decrees with police forces around the country, but yesterday, Jeff Sessions, the new Attorney General, ordered a department-wide review of consent decrees and filed in court to pause proceedings in one particularly troubled department, the Baltimore PD. David Noriega explains the major policy change that could be in the works.
The administrations of Donald Trump and Barack Obama differ in many ways, but law enforcement policy is one of the biggest. Under Obama, the Justice Department was unusually proactive in investigating police departments accused of racial bias and excessive force. That's what happened in Baltimore after the death of Freddie Gray and the unrest that followed.
If unconstitutional policies or practices are found, we will seek a court-enforceable agreement to address those issues. We will also continue to move forward to improve policing in Baltimore, even as the pattern or practice investigation is underway.
The Justice Department has had the authority to conduct these investigations since 1994 in the wake of the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. Obama embraced consent decrees, which police reformers celebrated as an official acknowledgement of systemic racism in American police departments. The Trump administration, under Attorney General Jeff Sessions, takes a very different view. In his memo ordering the Justice Department to review its consent decrees with police, Sessions listed a number of principles intended to explain the move, including the idea that, quote, the misdeeds of individual bad actors should not impugn or undermine the legitimate and honorable work of law enforcement. Consent decrees have a mixed record. They often take much longer and cost much more than expected, and they don't always lead to real reforms. But Obama-era officials and supporters of police reform point to several academic studies finding that past consent decrees have been successful not only in solving problems within the police, but even in reducing crime. A Harvard review of the consent decree in LA, for example, found that crime went down by 33.5% between 2003 and 2008, which is when the LAPD embraced the decree. Either way, these agreements are one of very few ways that police departments can be pressured to change for the better. And in their absence, police officers across the country are much more likely to feel they can behave as they see fit.
Today, New Orleans accepted final bids from companies vying to remove 4 Confederate statues from the city. There are about 1,500 public tributes to the Confederacy nationwide, and a growing number of lawsuits challenging whether they should be taken down. A recent federal court decision clearing the way in New Orleans marks the defeat of a ferocious legal campaign to protect the statues. But the battle over what they stand for, and who controls their narrative, is far from settled.
There was some graffiti on the monument probably 5 or 6 years ago. And I said to our church administrator, "There's a monument to Jefferson Davis?" And she's like, "Yeah, and we're looking at it." And I remember what I said, maybe we should leave the graffiti up. The monuments do not tell the story of the United States or the Civil War or the Confederacy. They celebrate white supremacy. People who put these monuments up to make it clear who was up and who was down, and that people better fall in line. And when we gather, do we want to gather under Confederate monuments, for goodness sakes?
I have always known that the statues were there and really didn't give much attention to them. I was kind of straddled the fence. I said, well, they've been there and it is a part of history, but those individuals that are depicted there did not always represent all the people. I began to have a change of heart.
We build monuments to what we value. And that's a really horrible statement for us, that we value people who fought for slavery.
Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, Beauregard, these are all great men of history by any measure. But this is one of our most beautiful monuments. I mean, it has everything. With the way it's presented on the pedestal in this traffic circle that was made for this monument, this is just crazy. If you start disassemble pieces of our diverse culture, what are you going to have?
I feel to believe that by moving these monuments, sometimes history can repeat itself. So therefore, we have to be very careful. I would not want to see this history be lost whatsoever.
The point of this was never about a white supremacy thing. New Orleanians wanted to honor their sons who served, and it still goes on today with all of our wars. So I think the mayor just used it to make ugly political points with this whole thing.
The future does not belong to sleepy southern towns that revere the Confederacy. And I am a little bit surprised about how intensely some people are hanging on to this false version of our past. That surprised me. And essentially, these statues were actually a lie. They were actually a perversion of history, not a recitation of history.
It's insulting to me. There is no justification. History has already rendered its verdict that slavery was wrong, the Civil War was wrong. So it's insulting to us that we have to dignify and engage in a debate with people when history has already rendered its verdict. We lived in the South where white supremacists wrote the textbooks. History is constantly being rewritten, and black people now have voice to talk about our history. And our verdict, of course, is that we don't want these white supremacy statues here.
The people of New Orleans have a right to decide what goes on the pieces of property that the people of New Orleans own. And I feel very certain that years from now, when people look back, they're going to go, well, that seemed so obvious.
Today is Equal Pay Day. It marks the number of additional days after New Year's that a woman would have to work to match a man's pay in the previous calendar year. The median annual earnings for women are still 80% of what they are for men. But that figure is pretty misleading. It doesn't account for job, industry, age, or hours worked. And most importantly, it's not one size fits all. Black women make 61% of what a white male earns, while Hispanic women make just 55%. But the best way to understand why the gender pay gap persists is to compare men's earnings against women's earnings in the jobs that women actually hold. A female financial manager, for example, takes home about $1,100 per week. If men were paid the same, they'd fall right on this dotted line. But male financial managers make about $500 more each week. In the 25 most common jobs that women hold, secretaries, teachers, social workers, the kind of jobs where women make up 90% of the workforce, men are still paid more in every single one of them. So even though labeling the pay gap as 80 cents on the dollar isn't all that meaningful, what we do know is that the disparity exists. This is Naval Station Norfolk, the largest naval base in the world. It's home to a number of submarines and aircrafts, as well as 75 ships and 134 aircraft carriers. It's also located just 10 feet above sea level. Since the 1930s, the water here has risen 14 inches, and that's expected to continue. So what am I looking at here?
This is a unnatural lake for us. It's not supposed to be here. This should all be flattened. This is a result of flooding. This is our main road, aircraft towway. So when we get a lot of rainfall or storms, this all will flood up on us right here.
So there's flooding on both sides and the road is right there, and that's an issue.
It is an issue, ma'am. If we have to shut down 2 gates, this is the world's largest naval installation. We have a lot of military personnel and civilian personnel. So it could take up to an hour, hour and a half just to get through 1 gate.
If cars can't get to the base because water is getting in their way, then the base might not be able to respond to, say, a national security threat. Which is why it's now become standard for the DoD to account for sea level rise when building new structures, anywhere.
So this is the Sewell's Point tide gauge. Since 1927, it's been monitoring sea level here.
Captain Vanderlei is a civil engineer who served in the Navy since 1991.
I'm assuming it's been updated.
His team is responsible for environmental construction contracting at naval installations across the eastern United States.
As we construct new buildings, sea level rise will be one of the criteria we look at to make sure that we're doing the smart thing when it comes to making them resilient to the future towards sea level rise.
So essentially it's something that you guys are keeping in mind with every new thing that you build.
Absolutely.
Do you think that this is climate change related?
I don't really know. I will tell you, I'm not a scientist, I'm an engineer. So we do know that we have recurrent flooding, and we're doing what we can to address that. What's causing it, I will leave that to others to speculate on.
Throughout our conversation, Vanderlei wouldn't attribute rising sea levels to climate change, but his bosses do. As early as 1990, the DoD described climate change as a potential challenge, significant enough to warrant serious examination. 24 years later, the DoD's quadrennial defense review put the stakes in plain language for everyone to see, stating that the impacts of climate change may increase the frequency, scale, and complexity of future missions. And this March, ProPublica revealed that Defense Secretary James Mattis contradicted the Trump administration on the day of his confirmation when he wrote, in a response to questions from Senate Democrats, that climate change is a driver of instability that the Department of Defense must pay attention to. Because of this, the DoD has impressed one of its strongest critics. Greenpeace has a long history of criticizing and in some cases disrupting the military. But when it comes to climate change, they've managed to find some common ground.
Reports that have come out recently, these are all online. This is the National
Charlie Cray is a senior research specialist at Greenpeace, who's been following the DoD's stance on climate change for years.
What kind of scenarios do you think the DoD is trying to prepare for?
Some of these threats are immediate, and that's to infrastructure bases both here and abroad. Many of them are longer term, 2-3 decades out. For instance, is in the sub-Saharan regions where you have the hottest climate on the planet. They're looking at factors such as drought, the kinds of instability it can create for already weak regimes, and the fact that that could lead to an opening for terrorist or other extreme violent groups. You hear this sort of reductive and simplistic conversation in the press. Well, what's a bigger threat, climate change or terrorism? And it doesn't work that way. It's kind of a matrix of factors that interact and connect.
According to Cray, that's why the DoD needs to address climate change head-on, both abroad and at home.
Are similar problems occurring elsewhere in the U.S.?
Virtually every Navy installation is on the ocean, so
right.
Virtually every Navy installation needs to consider this.
President Trump just signed a bill into law that allows internet service providers to cash in on a modern-day gold rush, selling the customer data they suck up every time you access the internet. But the telecommunications industry that gathers and packages that data is highly secretive, and its intentions remain unclear.
Shortly after Senate Joint Resolution 34 was passed, internet privacy activists launched campaigns to buy the browsing histories of the lawmakers who voted for it. But the effort may be misguided. It's almost impossible to know what data is being collected about you online, who it's going to, and what they're doing with it.
There are around 7,000 companies which we would think of as data brokers in the world. This industry has been living in the shadows and has been allowed to live in the shadows by regulators and politicians around the world for decades now.
We reached out to 9 of the largest data brokering firms cited in a 2014 FTC study. None commented by the time this piece went to air. They don't enjoy publicity. One of the biggest companies, Axiom, does offer a snapshot of its work on its website. It's a tool which allows you to enter a few data points to find out which of 70 categories you fit into in the eyes of online marketers.
All right.
We tested it out to see what it feels like to be sorted.
Okay. I see a website that says Axiom on it.
It's asking me for my age, my marital status.
Who the oldest child in my home is, my household income.
If I'm a homeowner, I'm not. Zip code and net worth.
I imagine this sort of information is more important now that it can be given away without my permission.
Okay, submit.
So what does it say?
It says I'm in cluster number 24.
Career building.
I'm cluster number 61, city life. Wow, okay, so I am cluster 2, an established elite.
City life is an ethnically mixed group
with a particularly high concentration of Asians, Hispanics, and African Americans.
This cluster also appreciates fine dining and fitness. I do.
These categories produce surprisingly accurate, if pretty general predictions.
You think it accurately describes you?
They nailed a lot of things down.
Aside from the fantasy sports and the married and the children, it's somewhat accurate.
I do shop at Express and H&M. I'm definitely African American, and I'm definitely living in a city. Statistically, all the information is accurate.
But this is just a small sample from 7 data points. It gets scarier when you consider that the FTC's investigation revealed that one data broker's database contains 700 billion of the individual data points which are used to make profiles of consumers. This practice of collecting data is not new. Junk mail firms used to buy your information from pizza delivery restaurants to help target their mailers. Then the world moved online.
I don't think anyone ever imagined that when they went to their pharmacy and bought their toothpaste, maybe a pack of condoms, whatever, that information would be sold out the back door and that would be later used to make judgments about things like their credit worthiness or their ability to get a loan to buy a car or their ability to buy a home.
I feel like if someone's going to know all this stuff about me, like, I'd just like to know who is behind it.
I consistently fail to be outraged when I'm supposed to be outraged about data collection. I use that knowledge to make my life simpler. I use one-click ordering. It's pretty much been a fine experience.
I think that kind of thing leads to generalizations that typically discriminate against, well, people who look like me, but I don't think that things like that aren't already happening, so.
Privacy activists fear this is only the beginning and that more protections for consumers will gradually be removed in the coming years. A former FTC official told us that the only way to guard against it completely might be to simply not use the internet.
Man, there's some good music out right now. I would listen to this. This sound like spring break. This sound like you on the beach and somebody surfing, some girl tits came out. Somebody popped a girl bra or something. I don't know. This is tight though. Who is this?
The new Pornographers.
That is a good name. That's a great name. You're getting way too big for your boots. I like this song. I know this joint. Hey, I like grime music. I like Skepta too. I got Skepta album too. I got Stormzy stuff. You know what I'm saying? I got Section Boys. I like grime music. Is that weed in a cigarette, blue slips? Like, what? I done smoked those spliffs over there. Is this some church music?
Country.
Huh?
It's country.
Oh, it's country, okay. I'll put it in my joint. I'll put it in the club just for a little second.
You would play this song in the club?
What? But I know how to mix though, so I play this, then I'll trap it out. Put some trap music over it. But it's tight. It's real tight.
But this Coldplay, if they just put an 808 on these joints, imagine what kind of trap songs they would make.
We rock with Diplo, Skrillex, Steve Aoki, you know what I'm saying? Them are homies, you know, like, they bring us out to their sets, and we get to see, like, they type of energy, what the EDM world is like, and it's, like, amazing. Like, I don't know, it's, like, fun. They rage.
It's like everybody.
It's a bunch of people come to, I don't know, it's tight.
Everybody running in slow motion.
It's exactly
like
what you think college is like.
That's Vice News Tonight for Tuesday, April 4th.